stands there between the law and the prophets, and he says, I have fulfilled all of this. And Peter and James and John have been taught all their lives to build their life, to listen to Moses and listen to Elijah, to study the law and study the prophets. And now God is saying the Old Testament shadows have found their reality in Jesus. See, a shadow, and that's what the New Testament says the Old Testament is shadows of that which is to come. What's the shadow? You can see your shadow. There's a light that shines down on me right now. I can look down. I can see my shadow. If you move and you see a shadow, you can tell, oh, there's the likeness of a human being. You can say, there must be a real person there because I see the shadow. But once you see the real person, you don't need to look at the shadow anymore. Why spend time on the shadow when the real person is there? This is why Paul got so frustrated, so angry with the Galatians who were trying to drift back into little laws like circumcision and things like little shadows. He's saying don't return to the shadows when the reality has come. There's only one time when there's not a shadow, and that's when the sun is at full noonday brilliance. And if the sun shines directly down on you, there is no shadow. And here's Jesus transfigured in the fullness of the glory of God shining down upon him. And it's as if to say there are no more shadows. Now the reality has come. And they fall down. And Peter, we don't have time to talk about it. Oh, Peter, he wants to set up these tents. He always wants to do something religious. People encounter God and they don't know what to do with it. And so they want to set up some kind of religion. Let me make you a little shrine here. I'll try to do something for you. And missing the whole point of the whole matter, Peter gets to see something that will only make sense to him later. Now, in this picture of the judgment of God that goes through Moses, the Red Sea that swallows up the people, and the judgment of God that moves through Elijah, and fire that falls down at Carmel, and fire that falls down when he calls it from heaven upon the enemies. All of this leads me to a couple of other interesting thoughts. In Luke chapter 9, when the days drew near for Jesus to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him, who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. So in Luke chapter 9, when the disciples see that people are resisting Jesus, they're like, well, we're with Jesus now. We're like Elijah. You want us to tell some fire to come down and consume them? Jesus said, you're missing the whole point. They're hearkening back to Elijah. But then in Luke chapter 12, Jesus says, I came to cast fire on the earth, and would that it were already kindled. I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished. Well, this is just strange that Jesus says over and over, in one way or another, the Son of Man came not to condemn, but to save. Jesus says, I came not to condemn, but to save. He came to love. But here he says, I came to cast fire on the earth. Well, which one is it? Did Jesus come to show kindness and mercy and save the lost? Or did he come to cast fire on the earth? Tim Keller has a wonderful point in reflection on this, saying that what really the proper reading of this text, when he says, I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how great is my distress until it is accomplished, that he's really echoing what he's just said. Jesus has already been baptized with water. What's he referring to? He's referring to the immersion in the sufferings of this world. He says, I got a baptism. I'm going to be baptized in suffering. I'm going to be immersed in the suffering of this world. I'm going to be immersed in the pain and the judgment of this world and all that sin has meant. The reason that there wasn't fire called down on the Samaritans is the same reason there's not fire called down upon you and me or anyone else who's in Christ. And that is because Jesus did come to save the world, and Jesus did call to bring fire down, but the fire fell on him. The wrath of God came on Christ. And he was immersed into the judgment that you and I should have experienced. Moses was an instrument of God's judgment against Egypt, and Elijah an instrument of God's judgment against Jezebel. But Jesus was the instrument and recipient of the judgment of God against all sin forever and ever. And so it is that Peter and James and John, they fall down on their faces and they look up. And Moses and Elijah are gone, and the text says it was Jesus only. Because in the end, you don't need the law and the prophets and Moses and Elijah and judgment. And if you have Jesus only, it's all you need. And that's the gospel.